Hello everyone, this is Bentley. Planet. Fallen Forest is done. But we got a few things we need to talk about. First off, we did a bunch of hardscape initially in the previous video, and there was some detail work I said I needed to do. It's a couple of short pictures to just kind of show you some of the basics of the detail work, but you'll see it up close in the B-roll as well. Let's talk about how we did those details, where they matter, the planting, and the sponge filter in the room. It's an elephant in the room, sponge filter room. Anyway, so I went to some local places. I first went to Aquarium Co-op because normally they have these like broken up things of Dragonstone and Sirius Stone. They've been out for a little while, something like 6+ months. So shows you how often I pay attention to hardscape when I go in. Not enough. But luckily, one of my other favorite local pet stores, Denny's Pet World, had a bunch in stock. I got to go over there, check that out, get what I needed, and then also we're going to talk about the kind of decorative gravel up front. So a reminder that we have the Brightwell substrate system in the back. It's about total depth in the back, and it's a strong slope, so don't let it be too deceptive. But there's a pretty strong slope. There's a picture here to kind of show you from the side of the tank. There's about 6 total inches of substrate, 6.5, at its maximum height. So that's a good amount of substrate. And just a reminder, this video is sponsored in part by Brightwell. They provided all of the substrate for this aquarium, so a big thank you to the folks at Brightwell Aquatics. They're not paying me for this. They just supplied the material. They don't get to see the video ahead of time, but for transparency's sake, I do need to do that. Plus, you'll probably see a thing that says paid promotion up in the corner. Because anytime that product is provided, YouTube requires us to say that. So we're saying it. It was given to me free. Thank you, Brightwell. We used almost 2 full bags of Brightwell Rio Oscuro. It's more like 1.8 because one of my bags was partially used as some filler somewhere else. And then a whole bag of the Brightwell Lateran Substrat VF. And that's that stuff that's like coffee ground consistency. That's in the bottom, then over the top, Rio Oscuro gives us a nice, good system for all the crypts in the back. The gravel up front, and we'll bring this up to the camera so you can see, because I have lots left over, is this stuff here. This is Safety Zorb. And the beautiful part about this stuff here is it is a Montmorillonite clay. You can get 40-pound bags of it from Tractor Supply Company for $8. We've talked about this before, similar to like the clay-based non-clumpy kitty litters, a product called Oil Dry, and Safety Zorb, and maybe Turfus. These are all good kind of like DIY or cheaper substrate options for those looking for something with a high CEC capacity. But usually, because there aren't any nutrients kind of preloaded, I think charged, if you will, in these like there are with aqua soils, we do a process called charging. Since this is just a really thin layer on the top, just to be decorative, to kind of match it with the stone and look a little more natural, like a stony kind of riverbed, there's not a ton of this in there, so we don't need to worry about charging it. When you do deal with this stuff, and you probably see it behind me, it can leave your water really cloudy, but this is after a water change, and there's a lot of micro bubbles, but here's a picture. Beforehand, you can see like it's much more dusty and harder to see into. This stuff, even when well rinsed, is fairly dirty. So make sure that you're rinsing it really, really, really well. And one way that I did this, I have this cool stainless steel double sieve that is easy to get off Amazon if you're interested. Normally used for like cooking or something like that, but it's fine enough that it actually works really well for rinsing out like your crushed coral, Safety Zorb, a bunch of things. Just don't put like actual dirt. That's a little too fine. But anything that's a similar size to crushed corals, things like that, those will stay in and some of the very fine particulates will get through, but you'll keep a majority of it and you'll be able to rinse it out. I did some really thorough rinsing on about, actually I have to look at this, 12 cups worth. I barely used it, so I just had this measuring cup. You can see how dusty this is. That should give you an idea. But realistically, I only used a little bit more than this container and about a half more container worth. So you don't need a ton when you're just using it in decorative fashion. And I know we've done some B-roll, but let's talk about the plants and the stuff that's in there. So I used 20 total pots of plants. I had more, but a bunch of the non-appetit that I had picked up had some issues and just basically melted away. And this is a problem. It's not, I wouldn't blame it on the place I got it from, because this happened to more than just mine. It happened to basically an entire shipment. So just the particular ones that came from a farm not very strong, and that's not their fault, right? They can only do so much. So I don't have very much non-appetit in here. I borrowed some very, very tiny, and you'll see it in places, of a much rarer Anubias out of one of my other tanks called Anubias bonsai. So you've got these teeny tiny little babies. When you see those are Anubias bonsai. That's personal stuff that I've had kind of rat-holed away. But other than that, we used a bunch of Cryptlutea, about 5 or 6 total pots. I think it's 6 total pots of Cryptlutea to do the background. We have 2 tiger lotuses that are in this tank in 2 different spots, just to give us kind of a nice accent piece and a pop. I wanted to kind of come up and over that wood, look like the more established plants kind of up on our river bank here, right? And then we have a mixture of Anubias nana, Anubias golden, and Anubias golden coin. So these give us, I think there's some Cophifolia in there too. And then to kind of top this off, we have a little smattering of some Boos Black Pearl. So just kind of a little accent piece to give us a little bit more. I'm thinking about adding a few other plants from my personal collection to give some extra pop in a few places, but for right now you can see how densely planted for our design and our concept this tank already is. There's a great amount of plant work in here, but there's also a sponge filter, which takes up places where plants could be, and there's room for some of those plants to grow out. But let's talk about that sponge filter, because I need your help. I originally talked about the next step for this tank is putting CO2 on it. We're going to put the Aquarium Co-op CO2 kit on there, their regulator. I've got a tank. We're going to use the nano diffuser. So all this stuff that you guys can easily pick up and replicate something very similar to this aquarium. You might not use the same plants. You might choose different wood. You might choose different rock. But you could do this setup very easily, because there's nothing super complicated in this tank. But right now we have a sponge filter on this thing. We have to get something to get the nitrogen cycle and some water movement in this tank before we hook up CO2. But my question is this. This is where I need your help. So in the comments below, I need you to give me your thoughts, and I'm just going to listen to the audience. Initially, I wanted to test the CO2 regulator from Aquarium Co-op by a number of different mechanisms. So with sponge filtration, with a sponge filter and like some kind of circulation pump, and then moving on to powered filters like a hang on the back and a canister. We've put together this really pretty aquascape, and by we, I mostly mean my wife. She did all the hardscape and made it look amazing, and I just kind of finished off some details. But she did the hard work. She made all the decisions and made this thing look amazing. So my question to you guys is this. Do we walk through that process and have that big, bulky, ugly sponge filter in this tank and do that with this tank? Or do we just step it up and we go full crazy and put a very nice filter on this tank? And we can test another filter we haven't tested yet, but we could do something like the F-Zone stainless steel bodied canister filter as an example. There's lots of other options we could do. You know, there's some of the smaller oases that we haven't touched. You could look at some of the newer flue balls, even though like I've done 306s and I've had 305s all over the place. And while I haven't officially like reviewed them, I've messed with those filters forever, so I have a good idea on them. There's things like we could look at something like the Ciche if we really wanted to. It's very similar to a lot of other filters, so I don't know that you need my feedback, but that's what this is for. So just let me know in the comments down below. How should we proceed? Should we just get the final filter for this tank, install it, get that CO2 running, and call it good? That's it. Just test the CO2 on this more simple plant setup, but have it with all the rest of the bells and whistles that we would expect in this tank long term. Or do we do our testing walking through each of the different methods in this tank? Just so you know, I will do other CO2 testing in a different tank that isn't as aquascaped, and we will definitely run through that cycle in that situation. if we do not do it here. So with that in mind, please, in the comments down below, I want to hear from you guys. What would you like to see done for Fallen Forest? That is going to be your part of how you make this our tank. My wife aquascaped it. I planted it. I'm going to choose the fish, naturally. But I think it's an important question. So please, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. We'll do some future stuff. The next video, watch for that. We're going to be walking through a full tutorial of setting up the CO2 on this particular tank. So how you would install the expandable manifolds, get it set up, the ways that I like to run my CO2 in a tank, all those things, okay? So that's going to be our next video. That's it. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think? Do we go all the way, or do we walk through the full cycle? I need to hear from you guys, because that'll determine how this tank shapes up very, very soon. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.